when you experience time, you only experience it by drawing forward a memory into this moment. You may say, well, I am aware that time is real and linear, for there is a bar at the bottom of this YouTube video. And that bar alerts me that I have been watching you for this amount of time. But you are only aware that you started watching this video by recalling the memory here and now into this moment. And by recalling the memory here and now into this moment, you are ultimately reaffirming the reality I am speaking of, that for consciousness and awareness, all there is the timeless presence of this moment of which you are aware. If you are potently, lovingly aware of this moment, time disintegrates. Now, again, you have problems where we must integrate and understand what is being said. As you may say, well, I planted a tree. My body gave birth to a child, and that child is now X amount of years or this size in comparison to when they were born. This is evidence of time. How can you say time is only a reality that is conjured in thought here and now? The best way to play with that would be with a metaphysical game. That how do you know you didn't appear now with all of the memories of time behind you, including all else around you, appeared now, and has that intertwined web of memory, inclusive of your children and your relationships with them, inclusive of the memory that you planted the tree that is ever so big in your garden right now. The experience of time as a conscious sentient being can only take place now, as you recall a memory, or you drag in the anticipation of a future. Millions upon millions of children are laid alone, suffering, starving, with bed sores, confused, in pain, mentally, physically, emotionally, unable to talk, unable to get up and walk away, unable to call for help. And so a child incarnates in a body which is defective, in a world which is defective, and they have parents who are defective, and they keep them alive not out of love and compassion, but out of fear that they will be prosecuted for infanticide if they don't. And these children are there in this bubble, this cocoon of a frequency of suffering like you have never imagined. This village, it will start the journey in collective human consciousness for us to recognize and see that these millions of invisible children are here. And perhaps we might get up and go to war for them and set them free. And in setting free one child, you begin to set free fallen consciousness for all of man. Happy New Year, and thank you for the blessings that you shared with our children and our family, which allowed us to not merely have fun, but to place within the mind of very fragile and traumatized children memories of wonder and magic and joy in a bed of memories that are predominantly traumatic. And these memories will help as we raise and grow our children, as it were, for them to be different human beings when they are older, for they will be able to look back into memory and pull forward something beautiful and magical, not only something dark. Thank you for that. And that leads me into a topic which is profoundly important, but overlooked all too often. We feel deeply. I once felt deeply that I understood this topic, and that topic is time. Now, when you say time, you get notions of clocks and hours and minutes. But time in consciousness is something that Yeshua tried to emphasize the importance of endlessly. And the reason he tried to emphasize the importance of time endlessly is that the universal adversary, Satan, uses time to place humanity in bondage. Every time you find a human who is in bondage to the proclivities of sin, that which takes the energy of the human and uses it in a way which is not building them towards their best destiny in this reality. All humans in that position are in the bondage of time. Now, you may not understand initially what I am saying, and so it requires a little attention and exploration. But Yeshua said, "Take no thought for tomorrow, for today's evil is sufficient of itself." Strong statement, telling you, realign to today. He also said, "He who takes the plough and looks back is not worthy of the kingdom." A realignment to stay away from the past and today. If we eliminate the word today, we can say now. Now, if you say now to someone, however, their mind may fragment a slice of time and say, it's this second or this millisecond. But this is not what now is. Yeshua was bringing you back to a freedom of time into a space of consciousness which is timeless. It is there we have dominion over the world. It is there where we die to self. It is there where we have authority over the demonic. It is there, in timelessness, that humanity has its joy, its freedom, and its most expansive state. When you experience time, you only experience it by drawing forward a memory into this moment. You may say, well, I am aware that time is real and linear, for there is a bar at the bottom of this YouTube video. And that bar alerts me that I have been watching you for this amount of time. But you are only aware that you started watching this video by recalling the memory here and now into this moment. And by recalling the memory here and now into this moment, you are ultimately reaffirming the reality I am speaking of, that for consciousness and awareness, all there is the timeless presence of this moment of which you are aware. If you are potently, lovingly aware of this moment, time disintegrates. Now, again, you have problems where we must integrate and understand what is being said. As you may say, well, I planted a tree. My body gave birth to a child, and that child is now X amount of years or this size in comparison to when they were born. This is evidence of time. How can you say time is only a reality that is conjured in thought here and now? The best way to play with that would be with a metaphysical game. that how do you know you didn't appear now with all of the memories of time behind you, including all else around you, appeared now and has that intertwined web of memory, inclusive of your children and your relationships with them, inclusive of the memory that you planted the tree that is ever so big in your garden right now. The experience of time as a conscious sentient being can only take place now, as you recall a memory or you drag in the anticipation of a future. All of that is taking place within the mind here, in this eternal, ongoing isness. In the space where we enter that isness, that timelessness, we will meet Christ. It is there we are spiritually reborn, we are born again. The enemy is reliant on time to hold you in bondage. As this human organism sits here speaking and the awareness is animating its intelligence, awareness within the intelligence knows there are two roads by which a human can speak from. The human organism can speak from memory and personal history, or the human organism can speak from a connection to this eternal timeless moment, and its connection is filled with spontaneity. You are spontaneously being animated by that connection, not by your memory and its analysis. It is two completely different ways by which human speech and life can be animated. One is from timelessness and one is from time. They are not in opposition to one another, but if we lose track of awareness of how the demonic or the universal adversary or Satan uses time to keep us in the bondage of the lower of sin, then we will be forever vulnerable to making grave errors and mistakes as the human incarnations that we are. In an ironic state, you may see that this human, when speaking about the personal history, will use a different language framework. That framework will be me, myself. This framework will be personal. The danger when speaking from a connection with the present moment where the living God dwells, and using language which is personal and personalized around personal history, the danger there is that the human organism that is being animated by awareness, the speaker, can take the listener, referencing you as the listener and I as the speaker, and bring you to a space where you say this message is about this personality, this individual, and not about you as the listener who is also able to access the living God. And ultimately, these transmissions that are singing from the heart of this human organism have one hope, that the spontaneous guidance of Christ, where we are yielded to it in faith, can visit the life of the listeners and allow the listeners to be led with that great love that has led the life of the speaker. And yes, the speaker, this organism and its awareness, has a history and a story, is the keeper of a story which is filled with faith, and that story belongs to the glory of God and God's way and God's love. It doesn't belong to a persona and a personality and an Englishman and all of these labels. It belongs to resonance here and now with the timeless presence of the God of all creation that has no beginning and no end. For it is the animator that through synchronicity and the like took the life of this organism away from time and memory and self and personal history and birth certificate identity, and took it into the will of the Christ, as I would label it, and said, "Go this way, child," and the child followed. Therefore, the hope of such messages as this one is to awaken others to that space where the Christ can take it, the living God can take the organism that you are. "For thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." How can that be done if not through your vessel? And how can that be done through your vessel if your vessel's mind is constantly occupied with the personal history and its analysis and way of life and its habituation? There must come a moment of spontaneous movement in faith for the will of God to animate and manifest through you. Therefore, the language set is different. Interestingly, in another ironic twist, as the awareness speaking here has its own story and the keeper of a story that will be shared and animated in due time, has a record recently of a terrible tragedy within inside the work of our family, a tragedy that came to light. The Spirit of the living God, when we are in timelessness, ensures that we have love for those who are profoundly unlovable. That is the importance of getting free from time and into timelessness, away from where Satan has held you in bondage with time to sin and the world and your self-desire, and into the expansive heart space of the truth, that you only know time by pulling forward memories into this moment, in this moment, of this moment, from this moment. You only have here. All else is illusory, all else is thought. Even if there are physical records in the world, you as a functional being in the presence of God must enter the eternal. You must enter timelessness. Nevertheless, a man that the structure of the organization that God has given birth to through many of us who have surrendered to the will of God in this timeless space had been helped by us for 5 years from a life of great trauma and using drugs and a cocktail of different drugs and addictions. We set him free. We also cared for a child of his, a little girl who now has become old enough to inform us that her father had raped her. This, of course, is a crime, and this man has been imprisoned. The topic of time comes forward for me as I looked, and with a great awareness and struggle. A struggle to continue to love this man after I knew he had harmed a child in such a heinous way. A struggle to not react with anger and violence as we are all wired in some areas of ourselves to do. And what came forth from God was time. That Satan had held that man in bondage with time. He had lived with the memories of trauma, so dominant that he couldn't stay in the presence of timelessness where the love of God would be with him. And now that will haunt him for the rest of his life for the crime he has committed whilst intoxicated on a cocktail of drugs against his own daughter. You see, by living in the bondage of the trauma of your memory, you live in the bondage of unforgiveness. And unforgiveness is like someone offering you boiling water. You may hold unforgiveness for them, but the boiling water will only burn you, just as the unforgiveness will burn you internally. And the inability for this man to conquer his unforgiveness meant that he stayed in the bondage of time and memory, living constantly as a victim from an energetic state and generating an image of a victim who therefore felt justified in using its drugs, for it had not forgiven and healed. And whilst using the drugs, you are disembodied and you can be influenced by all kinds of heinous, demonic forces and energies, or the very darkest of shadows of man. And in this instance, rape your own child. This man psychologically had begun to embrace timelessness and receive the love of God. But nevertheless, the records within reality's time were set in the memory of the child that he'd raped. You see, that child can only experience the memory of that trauma now. That father can only experience, if he does remember it at all, due to the intoxicated state he was in, can only experience the memory of that now. As a being of consciousness, despite the fact these events happened, time can only be centered around you bringing forward a memory in this moment. If you can become aware of this very clearly, you will be able to set yourself free from the bondage of your wounds and your traumas that leave you separated from the wholeness of God's presence and love and lead you to commit sin. Acts that harm another or infringe upon another's free will, or acts that take the vitality of what you are and instead of it being stored towards God's highest good for the manifestation of life that you are, that you owe unto Creator, are used in the pursuit of pleasure or worldly distraction. And here is the trap of all of humanity when it comes to Satan's bondage and time, is that we are living in the illusion of linear time within inside consciousness, within inside our awareness. And because of that, we become so lost in it that we are persistently recalling memories of sensation and pleasure in the hope to attain them in the future, all the while doing so to try and fulfill the void that is there because we are not in timelessness. For in timelessness, you are hit with this fulfillment of God's love and expansion. You are filled with it, with this amazing love and all of that want from the world to distract yourself, to entertain yourself, to indulge in whatever 5 sense prison that you are indulging in. It all becomes deeply quiet as you recognize the truth of timelessness and what you are, and you stand in the love of the living God, the Creator, and you become whole. Your cells, your heart, your energy body, your energy systems, your energy centers become whole. They reverberate with the endless love of Creator, for you have awoken into the truth of this moment, which is the only reality you have. It's the only place you can live from. There, the flavour of the memory of pleasure or the anticipation is gone. And yet you are trained from being a child. You are trained to live away from timelessness. You are dropped into education systems that must be afflicted by Satan in some way. For they tell you, recall from memory and you will pass in the future. And they never take a single moment to say, but don't forget timelessness. Don't forget here and now you may be animated by something other than memory and thought. The spontaneous arrival of the living God that causes the speaker to reference itself impersonally. For the human body, this human organism and the awareness within it is aware that that connection is here and that energy is pulsing within it. And as soon as that energy is not pulsing, the mind will wander to the personal history, and my entire language system will shift to me and my. The organism's language system will move away from the impersonal to the personal. But this is not a personal message. This is the universal truth of humanity. That if you are in bondage to sin, you are in bondage to time. And Jesus said, take no thought for tomorrow, for today has enough evil of its own. Do not take the plough and look back, or you are not worthy of the kingdom. The kingdom is the timelessness of now. And that timelessness is the understanding that you can only experience time by calling forth memories here in this moment. And if you spend enough awareness in that moment, you will understand that that moment is eternal and timeless, and you will understand your own eternal and timeless nature when you are home with Christ. Anchoring within that place actually requires no religion. It requires no philosophy, no politics. But universally, anatomically, the organism to arrive in timelessness must have access to a higher intelligence and its own higher mind. My organization bears the sign of the cross, the crucifix, the sign of Christianity. In Africa, it's a universal calling card for love. If I leave a message for someone with a cross on the end, they will know I belong to something to do with service. It's beautiful that it still holds that power in consciousness. And yet for many, that cross will mean nothing about the transcendental transformation of the human now. To stand before all of creation, liberated from time, is the offer of the sacrifice of Yeshua on the cross in a physical format. You stand before all of creation and you say, I have no record of sin or wrongdoing. I am a brand new creation, and I am righteous and holy and pure and true, and deserve all of the blessings of my Creator and power to come through me. Not because I am, but because it was paid for by one that is, and therefore I am psychologically allowed to step into that state of being. Few will ever tell you that. But beyond there, anatomically, the cross represents the rising of the Christ, the sacred oil inside humanity. Christ means anointed. Anointed means bless the head with oil. You bless the head with the sacred oil that rises through your 33 vertebrae and opens the higher mind of man in your skull. Jesus dies at the age of 33 in Golgotha, the place of the skull. Your inner Christ rises through the 33 vertebrae into your skull, and it dies and sacrifices itself in between the pituitary and the pineal to rewire your brain into the higher mind. That is a universal truth of all human anatomy. That's why I find universal truth in the symbol, but it has another meaning for those who follow what we do. You will know that cross has a meaning that is beyond a mere human sacrifice alone, beyond the death of a man, the Son of God, the divine incarnate. It is also about the inner within you, which you have access to. In that space, timelessness is achievable. In that space, therefore, freedom from the bondage of this world is achievable. And in that space, the expanded frequency of the organism when it is liberated from time, and with it the bondage of the world that is afflicted upon us from there, its frequency becomes such that it can purify the demonic. It can call on the all-knowingness of Creator to guide its fellow man. And that frequency is so comfortable that as soon as deception or betrayal or lies or secrets step in, the frequency starts to fade and the discomfort is evident immediately. But some have spent so long fading away from that frequency of wholeness that is found in the truth of our eternal existence here and now, our awareness, that has no beginning and end and yet is gazing through your body, through your eyes, through the eyes of the speaker and the listener. That power of Christ comes through man being free from time. We expand, we purify. When we drag ourselves away from that, some have gone so far away they don't remember timelessness. They don't remember that there's a road home to joy. They don't remember there's a road home where this world is good, as God so clearly stated in the Bible, in the story of creation. And he saw that it was good. It is good. It's beautiful. It's magnificent. It's majestic. It's magical. We must transcend time for that to hit the heart, and for that to hit the soul, and for that to allow Christ to animate our intelligence and give us dominion over the demonic. For Christ has no beginning and no end, and if you are to become an obedient servant to Christ, you must find the place where no beginning and end is your state of consciousness. It cannot be a structure that says, I hold Christ, I hold God. No man will ever attain Christ. Christ attains the vessels of men. And in timelessness it is attained. And in this persistent journey of memory of pleasure, anticipation of pleasure, and missing the mark, sin means to miss the mark here and now. In the persistent movement and never sitting on the mark of timelessness, man will continue to spiral into the bondage of the fallen ones and our fallen world and the technologies they are saturating and enchaining and entombing us with as I speak. The same technology that transmits this message to you from this organism that dare not personalize it, for it feels it's coming from a spontaneous connection with something vast and great and wiser than the organism and its intelligence alone. That same technology is currently liberating perhaps the mind of some of you. It's currently holding young men and women in bondage to perverse activities. Timelessness will fill the void they are chasing in the perversion. For timelessness is Christ. And the bondage to sin requires time. And freedom from it requires timelessness. And again, to finish, if you can't see this, and you say, but these trees grew, someone planted them, I've aged. Yes. But only do we know that by recalling a memory in the moment of this isness. That's the only place we can experience time here. And you don't know if you've manifested in the last millisecond or now with all the memories and entanglements and relationships that you have. So all we have is here. And all concepts of time are brought forward here. So see that time is merely a concept of thought within inside of the organism and its consciousness. And as with all bondage with Satan, thought is the reliance of that bondage. Thought is the birth of separation. It is the birth of time. It is the birth of conflict. It is all coming from the same party, and the same bondage of the universal adversary is destroyed when man knows Christ, and man will know Christ when timelessness explodes through his consciousness and his heart. And that frequency that explodes will give him the powers of Christ in human form to some degree or shape. I shall leave it there. God bless, guys. I love you all.